I never thought grief could split my family in two on the same day. My own daughter would cause me so much pain. The morning I laid my husband to rest should have been about farewell, about love, about closure. Instead, it became the day I discovered the dark truth about my own daughter. As I stood beside Henry's casket and reflect on our 50 years of shared life, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet mornings over coffee, all reduced to silence beneath that polished casket. But it wasn't death that crushed me. It was the words that came drifting across the grave. My daughter, Clara, leaned close to her husband, her voice soft but sharp enough to wound. "She actually thinks she's getting something," she muttered. "Let her dream. She won't see a single cent." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The world around me dimmed. The priest's prayer became a blur. I turned toward her, hoping I'd misheard, that grief had twisted her voice into something cruel. But her eyes met mine, steady, unflinching, cold. The child I had once held against my chest, the little girl who used to slip wildflowers into my hair, now looked at me as though I were an obstacle to remove. I felt something inside me tear. Not my heart, but the fragile thread that had held our bond together all these years. It wasn't anger that filled me then. Anger burns too fast, too bright. This was different. Quiet, deliberate, heavy. A resolve settling deep in my bones. I lowered my gaze to the earth beneath my feet, whispered a prayer for Henry's soul, and in that same breath made a promise of my own. I will not crumble. I will not let her destroy what we built. Before we continue with the story, comment where you are watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel to get more uplifting stories about women that have been betrayed and mistreated by family members, but still got back on their feet with a happy ending. Now back to our story. When we returned home from the cemetery, the silence was so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. The house still smelled faintly of Henry's aftershave, that warm woody scent he always wore, lingering like a memory that refused to fade. I stood in the foyer, my hands trembling as I removed my black gloves, half expecting to hear his voice calling from the study, or his familiar footsteps coming down the stairs. But there was nothing, just stillness. A stillness so deep it swallowed even the tick of the grandfather clock. For a moment I let myself close my eyes and breathe it in. That scent, that silence, that ghost of comfort. But when I opened them again, the illusion broke. Heard something. A faint rustling, the sound of drawers opening and closing, papers shifting. My heart clenched. It came from Henry's study, the one room he'd always kept sacred, even from our daughter. I followed the sound quietly, my shoes barely brushing the carpet. The door was ajar. And there, under the soft yellow glow of the desk lamp, stood Clara, my daughter, my only child. Her back was turned to me, her hair perfectly styled, her posture sharp and impatient. I watched in disbelief as she pulled open drawer after drawer, flipping through papers with the cold efficiency of a stranger searching for loot. For a second I couldn't move. I wanted to believe I was wrong, that grief had twisted my perception. But then she spoke. Her voice, low and clipped, broke through the silence. "Where is it? He must have left it somewhere. He wouldn't give it to her." I stepped back, my breath caught in my throat. She didn't notice. Her phone buzzed, and she answered it immediately. "Yes, I have the draft. I'll finalize it tomorrow. Don't worry about her, she's too soft to fight. I'll handle everything." Her tone was calm, calculated. There was no trace of sorrow, no hint of the daughter who had once clung to me in thunderstorms. I felt something shift inside me, a fracture, then a spark. It wasn't anger at first. It was something colder. Disbelief, maybe. Then it burned hotter, steadier. A part of me died right there in that hallway, but another part, a harder, clearer part, was born. I retreated quietly, holding onto the wall for balance. My fingers grazed a framed photo of her at age 10, grinning with a missing tooth. I remembered how Henry had built her a wooden swing in the backyard that summer. She'd laughed for hours, calling him her hero. My chest tightened. What had happened to that little girl? That night, sleep refused to come. I sat by the window in my old armchair, watching the moonlight spill across the garden. Every shadow reminded me of Henry. Every whisper of wind through the trees sounded like his voice saying my name. But when I closed my eyes, all I could see was Clara. Her smirk, her cold voice, her hands rummaging through Henry's life as if it were nothing more than property. Grief is supposed to soften a person, but that night it hardened me. The tears stopped, and something else took their place: resolve. She thought I was weak, fragile, easy to manipulate. She thought age had dulled my mind. But she didn't know what Henry had taught me all those years. That strength isn't loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet refusal to surrender. At dawn, I made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink and walked to Henry's study. The air in there felt heavier, as if holding its breath. His chair was still slightly pulled out, his pen resting beside a closed journal. The faint scent of tobacco and leather wrapped around me like an embrace. For a long while I just stood there, touching the edge of his desk, tracing the grooves his hands had worn into the wood. Then I began to search. Not in panic, not in haste, but with purpose. Every drawer I opened felt like a conversation with him. And then, tucked beneath a stack of old ledgers, I found them. Several envelopes, sealed with Henry's distinctive slanted handwriting. My name was on each one. I sat down and opened the first letter. His words flowed across the page, steady and loving. If you're reading this, my dear Margaret, it means my fears were not misplaced. Clara's ambition frightens me. Don't let her sell the house. Don't let her erase what we built together. You are stronger than you think. Protect what matters. My hands shook as I read. I opened another. I thought she'd find her way, but perhaps she's already lost. This home carries our memories, our laughter, our life. Don't let her greed turn it into a cage for ghosts. Tears blurred the ink. I pressed the letters to my chest and felt his words throb against my heart like a pulse. It was as if Henry himself were standing beside me, reminding me that love didn't end in the grave. It lived on in duty, in courage, in remembrance. I sat there for hours, watching the morning light creep across the desk. When I finally rose, I folded the letters carefully, slid them into a small box, and locked it away. I whispered into the still air, my voice trembling but firm. I won't let her erase us, Henry. I promise. The words echoed softly in the room, swallowed by the dust and sunlight. For the first time since his death, I felt something shift inside me. Not the ache of loss, but the quiet awakening of purpose. Whatever Clara was planning, I knew this much. She would no longer be dealing with a grieving widow. She would be dealing with a mother who had nothing left to lose. By noon the next day, the sound of the doorbell startled me from my thoughts. I had spent the morning sitting at the kitchen table, the box of Henry's letters beside me, rereading his words until they were etched into my memory. When I opened the door, there stood Mrs. Harris, my neighbor and oldest friend, clutching a warm casserole dish wrapped in a towel. Her gray curls framed a face that had known its share of sorrow, and her eyes held that kind of kindness that doesn't need words. "Oh, my dear," she said softly, stepping inside without waiting to be asked. "I thought you could use some company." The familiar smell of baked chicken and rosemary filled the air, blending strangely with the lingering scent of Henry's aftershave. I guided her to the kitchen, grateful for the distraction. She set the dish on the counter and looked around the house, her gaze lingering on the stillness that grief had left behind. "You've lost weight," she murmured. "Are you eating at all?" I managed a small smile. "A little. Enough to get by." She hesitated, her expression darkening. "Margaret, there's something you need to know." I turned to her, uneasy. Mrs. Harris wasn't one for gossip. Whatever she was about to say, I knew it wasn't trivial. She lowered her voice. "I ran into Clara yesterday at the pharmacy. She was talking to someone, loud enough for everyone to hear. Said she was taking control of things soon. That you're not well enough to manage the estate." The word struck like a blow. Even though I'd already witnessed her deceit, hearing it repeated, broadcast publicly, was another wound altogether. Mrs. Harris reached into her handbag and pulled out a small black device. "My nephew's in security," she explained. "He lent me this. It's a recorder. You should keep it with you. Quiet doesn't mean defenseless. I took it with trembling hands, feeling its weight. Small but heavy with meaning. My throat tightened. You think I'll need this? Mrs. Harris placed her hand over mine. I know you will. She's not playing fair, Margaret. You can't afford to either. Her words echoed in my chest long after she left. The house seemed to hum with quiet energy, the kind that precedes a storm. I sat at Henry's desk again, the recorder in my palm, running my fingers over the smooth plastic surface. It felt foreign yet oddly empowering. For years I'd been the gentle one, the peacekeeper, the mother who soothed every wound. But Henry's letters had changed something deep inside me. Grief had stripped away fear, leaving only resolve. That night I prepared for the morning as though for battle, not with weapons but with patience and silence. I laid out Clara's favorite china, the blue teacups she used to admire when she was younger. I even set a small vase of lilies in the center of the table. Everything had to look ordinary. She'd never suspect. When morning came, I dressed carefully in my softest cardigan, the one that made me look older, more fragile. My reflection in the mirror was convincing. Tired eyes, trembling hands, a face marked by sorrow. I looked like the helpless woman Clara believed me to be. At exactly 8, I heard her heels click across the marble floor. Her presence always seemed to command the room, sharp and intrusive, like perfume sprayed too thick. She didn't greet me. Instead, she sank into a chair, scrolling through her phone. "Morning, Mother," she muttered absently. "I've been talking to the lawyer. We'll have everything sorted soon." I poured her tea, steadying my shaking hands, though this time the trembling wasn't fear, it was control. I slipped the recorder into the pocket of my cardigan, pressing the small red button with a quiet click. Clara continued, her voice casual but cutting. "He said once you sign the care documents, it'll be easy to transition ownership. I'll handle the financial parts. You shouldn't worry yourself with details at your age." She laughed lightly, scrolling again. "Honestly, it's better this way. You'll be comfortable, and I won't have to deal with your stress. We'll make you sign when you're too tired to argue. It'll all be painless." My grip on the teapot tightened, but I kept my voice gentle. "That's thoughtful of you, dear." She barely looked up. "Of course. It's what's best for everyone." Her words slithered through the quiet like poison. But I stayed still, calm, listening to every syllable being preserved in that tiny device against my chest. Each word she spoke would become a thread in the web she was unknowingly spinning around herself. When she finally stood and left the room, the echo of her heels faded down the hallway. I sat there for a long while, staring at her untouched teacup. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from purpose. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt in control. She thought I was weak, too broken to fight. But what she didn't know was that grief can forge steel, and that I had just begun to sharpen mine. That evening, I could no longer bear the weight of silence. The walls of the house seemed to close in around me, whispering Henry's name and echoing Clara's cruelty. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies from the funeral bouquet, sweet but suffocating. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and walked out into the cool dusk, the fading sunlight painting the street in gold and gray. My destination was clear in my mind. St. Luke's Chapel, the place where Henry and I had exchanged our vows 5 decades earlier. The church stood quietly at the end of the lane, its stained glass windows glowing faintly from the inside. I hesitated at the door, my hand trembling on the worn brass handle. It had been years since I'd sought counsel there. Henry and I used to go together, sitting side by side in the second pew. Now I entered alone. Inside, the smell of old wood and candle wax met me, grounding and familiar. Father Andrew was kneeling by the altar, extinguishing the last of the candles. When he turned and saw me, his face softened immediately. "Margaret," he said gently, wiping his hands. "I was expecting you sooner or later." I tried to smile, but it faltered. "You always seem to know when something's wrong." He guided me to a pew, his hand steady on my arm. "It's written all over your face," he said. "Tell me everything." And I did. The words spilled out of me like a broken dam. The whispers at the funeral, Clara's venomous tone, her secret phone calls, her attempt to have me declared incapable. I told him about Henry's letters, about how they'd awakened something fierce inside me. I told him about the recorder, the deception, the feeling of living under siege in my own home. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking. Father Andrew was quiet for a long time. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of the evening breeze through the open window. Finally he said, "You've been carrying this burden alone for too long." "But Margaret, listen to me. Forgiveness doesn't mean surrendering your dignity. You can be kind and still protect yourself." His words struck me like a bell, clear, resonant, unshakable. I had spent most of my life believing that patience and silence were virtues, that love meant enduring quietly. But sitting there under the dim light of the chapel, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about weakness. It was about strength, the kind that refuses to be trampled. Father Andrew rose and walked toward his office. When he returned, a tall man followed him. His suit was plain, his expression serious but not unkind. "Margaret," Father Andrew said, "this is Mr. Grant. He's a lawyer I trust completely. I think you should talk to him." Mr. Grant nodded courteously. "Father Andrew told me a little about your situation," he said in a calm, measured tone. "I'll help you, but we must move carefully. People who act out of greed often overplay their hand." I met his eyes and saw something there I hadn't seen in a long time. Confidence. Not arrogance, but assurance born from experience. "I'm not looking for revenge," I told him quietly. "I just want to protect what Henry and I built." "That," he said with a faint smile, "is exactly why we'll succeed." When I left the chapel, the sky had deepened into violet. The church bell tolled softly behind me, and I walked home with a strange new calm in my chest. The evening air felt lighter, as though the act of speaking the truth had loosened its grip on my heart. At home I didn't turn on the lights right away. Instead I stood by the window, watching the moon rise above the orchard. For the first time in days, the house didn't feel haunted by grief. It felt alive, waiting. I lit a single lamp and knelt beside Henry's desk. One by one, I began laying everything out across the floor. The deeds to the house, the old tax receipts, the insurance documents, and Henry's handwritten letters. Each piece was a fragment of our life together. Every sacrifice, every memory, every moment of love turned tangible. I worked in silence, the rustle of paper the only sound. When I was done, I looked at it all, a mosaic of 50 years of devotion. Felt like he was there with me again, helping me prepare. I packed the documents neatly into a wooden box, wrapping the letters in linen to keep them safe. Then I carried the box up the narrow stairs to the attic, where the air was cool and dust floated like ash in the lamplight. I hid it behind the old trunk where Henry kept our wedding albums. As I closed the attic door, a deep calm settled over me. It wasn't joy, but something steadier, purpose. For the first time since Henry died, I felt I was no longer drifting through grief. I was standing anchored. I was doing something right. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered into the dark, "We're going to be all right, Henry." And for the first time I almost believed it. The next morning began with an uneasy stillness, the kind that settles before a storm. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, thin and cold, as I sat at the breakfast table with a cup of untouched tea. I could almost sense it, the shift in the air, the coming confrontation. Something in my bones told me that Clara would not wait long to make her next move. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 9 o'clock, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, the crunch of gravel beneath expensive tires. Moments later, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Clara stood there, her smile rehearsed and gleaming, flanked by two strangers in crisp gray suits. A woman held a clipboard pressed neatly to her chest, while the man offered a smile too polite to be genuine. "Mother," Clara began, her tone sweet enough to curdle, "I brought some professionals to help us. They're from a private care agency. I've been so worried about you living alone in this big house. I looked at her, perfectly put together, a picture of false concern, and said nothing. Behind her, the woman cleared her throat and spoke in a soft, patronizing voice. Mrs. Bennet, we're here to talk about assisted living options. Your daughter tells us you've been under a lot of stress. Stress? I repeated quietly, my fingers tightening around the edge of the door. Is that what she told you? Clara stepped forward, brushing past me like she owned the place. Mother, please, she said, turning to the strangers. She's been confused lately. Losing things, forgetting conversations. I just want her to be safe. That word twisted in my gut. She wasn't protecting me. She was trying to contain me. I glanced at the papers the man was now unfolding on the table. Forms full of legal language, authority transfers, medical consents. Everything carefully designed to strip me of my power without making a sound. Sign these, Mother, Clara said gently, almost coaxing. They'll take good care of you. I felt my hands tremble, but not from fear. From fury I had learned to disguise as fragility. I forced a brittle smile, the kind that women my age wear when the world assumes we've stopped thinking for ourselves. I see, I murmured, taking one of the pages and pretending to read. The text blurred before my eyes, not from confusion but from anger. And once I sign this, you'll be in charge of everything. Only the essentials, Clara said quickly, her tone syrupy and false. Finances, property maintenance, health matters. You shouldn't have to worry about all that. I met her gaze, steady, unblinking. No, I said softly. I shouldn't. The two strangers shifted awkwardly, sensing the tension but unsure where to stand. I folded the papers neatly and slid them back across the table. I'll think about it, I said, keeping my voice even. Clara's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. There's nothing to think about, she said, her tone tightening. Oh, there's always something to think about, I replied. The woman consultant tried to smooth things over, murmuring something about follow-up appointments, but I barely heard her. My focus was on Clara, the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth, the impatience in her eyes. She wasn't used to resistance. She expected compliance, silence. But she had forgotten, or maybe never known, that silence can be the sharpest weapon of all. When they finally left, I closed the door slowly, letting the click of the latch echo through the hallway. My knees felt weak, but my mind was razor-sharp. I had not signed a thing. She had underestimated me again. That evening I met Mr. Grant at his office, a quiet, wood-paneled room that smelled faintly of leather and paper. The lamplight cast a warm glow over his desk as I laid out everything I had gathered. Henry's letters, the deed copies, the recorded conversations, every piece of evidence that Clara had tried to build her scheme upon. He listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes, his expression unreadable. When I finally slid the small recorder across the table, he pressed play. Clara's voice filled the room, her cold words about making me sign when I'm too tired to argue. It was the first time I'd heard them replayed aloud, and even Mr. Grant's calm composure shifted slightly. When the recording ended, he leaned back in his chair. You've done well, he said quietly. You've built a stronger case than most people twice your age. I think your husband would be proud. My chest tightened at the mention of Henry. I hadn't heard anyone speak of him that way in weeks. Then, as I began to gather my things, Mr. Grant frowned, reaching for a folder on his shelf. Before you go, he said, I want to show you something. My assistant found this while cross-referencing old files. It might belong to your husband. He handed me a weathered laptop, Henry's old one, scuffed at the edges but still familiar. My breath caught. I thought this was lost, I whispered. We powered it on, and after a few minutes of patient waiting, a single file appeared on the screen. It was labeled for Margaret. My hands trembled as I clicked it open. Henry's face appeared, his eyes warm and steady, his voice filling the room. My darling, he said softly, if you're seeing this, it means you're fighting, and I know you'll win. Don't let her destroy what we built. Fight for what's ours. His voice cracked slightly at the end, and something inside me broke open. Tears slid down my cheeks before I could stop them. It wasn't just a message. It was his final gift, a reminder that I wasn't alone. I looked at Mr. Grant through blurred vision and whispered, "I'll fight, Henry. I promise." 3 days later, I stood before the mirror, fastening the buttons on Henry's favorite navy suit. The fabric was slightly loose on my shoulders now, but the weight of it steadied me. That suit had always been his armor, worn for every important moment of his life. Now it would be mine. I smoothed the lapels and took one last look at myself. There were new lines around my eyes, the kind grief leaves behind, but beneath them, I saw something I hadn't seen in months: resolve. The morning air was cool when I stepped outside, sharp against my skin. The cab ride to Mr. Grant's office passed in a blur of quiet streets and swaying trees. My hands rested on the box beside me, the one containing every letter, every document, every fragment of truth Henry and I had built together. As the city unfolded before me, I whispered a silent prayer. Let this be the end. When I arrived, Mr. Grant was already waiting by the door, calm and collected as always. "You look strong today, Mrs. Bennet," he said with a small nod. "I feel strong," I replied. And I meant it. He led me into the conference room, a simple space with polished wood and sunlight filtering through the blinds. The quiet hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. The chair across from mine was empty, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Minutes later, the door swung open. Clara swept in like a storm, every step echoing through the room. Her hair was perfect, her perfume sharp, her smile as brittle as glass. She was dressed in white, an odd choice, I thought, for someone walking into judgment. Behind her trailed her husband, Robert, eyes downcast and face pale. "Let's move this along," Clara said, tossing her purse onto the table with a dramatic sigh. "I have other appointments." I said nothing. I couldn't trust my voice not to shake. Mr. Grant simply inclined his head. "Of course," he said smoothly. "We'll begin." He opened the folder before him, laying out documents with practiced precision. Clara's gaze darted to each paper, confident. Too confident. She was expecting victory, expecting my submission. I almost pitied her. Almost. Then Mr. Grant pressed a button on the small speaker before him. The room filled with a sound I hadn't heard since the day Henry died. His voice. Warm, clear, and unshakable. "My dearest Margaret," he began, and I felt my breath catch. "If you're hearing this, then the time has come for clarity. I leave everything, the house, the business, the accounts, to my beloved wife. My daughter has lost her way. Perhaps one day she'll find it again, but until then, she will not destroy what we built." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade. Clara's face drained of color, her mouth parting in disbelief. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "This is manipulation." He didn't mean that, she forced him. Mr. Grant didn't flinch. "Mrs. Bennet," he said firmly, "these are your father's final recorded words. And for the record, the documents you provided have been verified as forgeries. Every one of them. Your signatures, your notary stamps, all falsified." Robert shifted uncomfortably beside her, his hands fidgeting in his lap. Clara turned on him, her voice rising. "You said it would work. You said." He didn't answer. He couldn't meet her eyes. "You old witch," she screamed suddenly, spinning toward me. "You turned him against me. You made him hate me." Her words cut through the air, sharp and frantic. But I didn't move. I simply looked at her, not with anger, but with something heavier, deeper. "Oh, no, Clara," I said quietly. "You did that all on your own." Her face twisted, caught between fury and shame. Mr. Grant's calm voice broke the silence again. "You're welcome to contest this in court," he said evenly. "But with the recordings, letters, and legal proofs your mother has provided, you will lose." The fight drained from her then. She sank into her chair, her hands clutching her temples, her once perfect posture crumbling. For a long moment, there was nothing but her shallow breathing and the soft ticking of the clock. I gathered the letters from the table, placing them gently back into the box. I felt no triumph, only an aching quiet like the air after a storm. When I rose to leave, Clara lifted her head. Her eyes, red-rimmed and glistening, met mine. "Mother," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please wait." I paused at the door but didn't turn back. Some distances, I realized, can't be crossed again. Outside, the sunlight was blinding. The air smelled of rain and something else, renewal. I drew a long breath and felt a strange calm settle over me. The fight was over. I hadn't just protected Henry's legacy. I had protected the woman he believed I was. Strong, patient, and unyielding when it mattered most. As I walked down the steps, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had lost a daughter, yes, but somewhere in the wreckage of it all, I had found my peace.